Hey, my name is William, and for 2 years I ate breakfast at the same diner every morning without saying more than 10 words to anyone. I sat at table 6 by the window, ordered the same thing every day, and kept to myself the way a man does when he's forgotten there's another way to live. Then one morning I looked down at my receipt and saw a small heart drawn in the corner right next to the total. It showed up again the next day and the day after that and every day for 3 months straight. I'm not the kind of man someone draws hearts for, and I couldn't figure out why she kept doing it until the morning I finally asked. I'm 53 years old, and I build custom furniture in a small workshop behind my house in a town called Millfield, about an hour north of nowhere worth mentioning. My hands are rough, my back aches by noon, and I've got sawdust in places I stopped trying to clean years ago. The work is honest and quiet, the kind of thing that keeps a man busy enough to not think too much about the empty rooms behind him. My wife Margaret died 2 years ago. A heart attack on a Sunday afternoon while she was watering the gardenias on the front porch. No warning, no slow decline, no chance to say the things you always think you'll have time to say. She was 51, and she was gone before the ambulance reached the end of our gravel drive. I found her myself. She was lying on her side with the hose still running, the water pooling around her shoes, and the gardenias she'd been tending were the only things still standing upright. I remember kneeling in the mud and pressing my hands against her chest like I could hold her heart in place through sheer will. But the mud soaked through my knees, and the water kept running, and she was already cold by the time I accepted what had happened. After the funeral, I went back to work the next morning because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I sanded a dining table for a woman in town who'd ordered it months before, and I remember thinking that the wood felt warmer than anything else in my life. The house grew quiet in a way. No more humming from the kitchen while she cooked, no more laugh from the back porch when the dog did something stupid, no more smell of her hand cream on the pillow next to mine. That's when I started going to May's Diner on Main Street. I went because the place was warm and full of sounds that weren't silence, and the food was good too, but that wasn't the reason. May's is a kind of diner that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1970 seconds, with vinyl booths cracked at the seams, a checkered floor that's worn smooth near the register, and a long counter where the regulars sit and argue about weather and politics like it's their job. The morning crowd is always the same. There's Phil, a retired mail carrier who eats oatmeal and reads the paper cover to cover. There's a woman named Donna who comes in with her teenage daughter and orders enough food for 4 people. There are 2 guys from the hardware store who drink coffee standing up like they're afraid to commit to a seat. And then there's me, the quiet one at table 6. I always sit at table 6. I order black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no jam. I eat slow, I drink my coffee black, and I leave the same tip every day. The other regulars stopped trying to talk to me months ago. I think they could tell I wasn't being rude, just that I'd used up all my words somewhere else, in a place they couldn't see. I go to May's, because the noise fills the space where Margaret's voice used to be. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, May yelling orders to the cook through the window in the wall, the low hum of conversation from people who still have someone to talk to. It's not company, but it's close enough to keep the silence from swallowing me whole. I didn't know it then, but that routine, that same table, and same order and same silence was about to be the thing that changed everything. I didn't do anything different. Someone noticed I was there, and that was what mattered. The waitress's name was Evelyn. She was new, or at least new to the morning shift, and I noticed her the way you notice any change in a place that never changes. She was young, maybe late 20s, with blonde hair she kept pulled back in a loose ponytail that always looked like it was one shift away from coming undone. She moved fast but not rushed, the kind of movement that comes from doing the same thing 100 times until your body stops thinking about it. She smiled at everyone, but not the kind of smile you put on because your manager told you to. It was a real smile, the kind that reaches the corners of your eyes, even when those eyes look like they haven't had enough sleep. She had a name tag pinned at an angle that suggested she'd put it on in a hurry, and there was a small scar on her left knuckle from something I couldn't guess at. The first morning she waited on me, she set my coffee down with the handle facing my right hand, which nobody had ever done before. I noticed because I'm right-handed and I always have to turn the cup. She didn't say anything special, just morning and a smile, and then she was already moving to the next table. When I finished eating, I asked for the check. She dropped the receipt on the table with a quick nod and kept walking. I picked it up, glanced at the total, and that's when I saw it. A small heart drawn in blue pen, right next to the amount. It was simple, the kind of heart a kid draws in school, two curves and a point at the bottom. Nothing fancy, nothing big, just a small, blue heart on a receipt from a diner in a town nobody's heard of. I figured it was a gimmick. Maybe May told the staff to draw hearts on receipts to make the place feel friendlier. The kind of small-town touch that gets mentioned in online reviews. I didn't think about it again. I left my usual tip, folded the receipt around it, and went home to my workshop. The next morning, same table, same order. Evelyn brought my coffee with the handle facing right again. I ate, I asked for the check, and when I picked up the receipt, there it was, another heart. Same blue pen, same spot on the slip. This time, I looked at it a little longer. The line was slightly uneven, like she'd drawn it fast while balancing 3 plates and a pot of coffee. Now I was paying attention. I glanced around the diner as other customers got up to leave, trying to catch a glimpse of their receipts on the tables. I couldn't see clearly from my seat, but I strained to look at the table nearest me after an older couple walked out. Their receipt was face down, but when the busboy flipped it over, I didn't see a heart, just numbers and a printed thank you at the bottom. The third morning, the heart was there again. This time, instead of leaving the receipt on the table, I folded it and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I don't know why I did that. It wasn't a decision I thought about. My hand just did it. The way your hand reaches for something before your brain has a chance to object. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and took the receipt out of my pocket. I held it under the lamp on my nightstand and looked at the heart. It was lopsided. One side was rounder than the other, and the point at the bottom curved slightly to the left. It wasn't perfect. And for some reason, I still don't fully understand. That made it harder to dismiss than if it had been flawless. I opened the drawer of my nightstand, the one where I keep my watch and a folded photograph of Margaret from the year we got married, and I placed the receipt inside. I closed the drawer and turned off the light, and I told myself it didn't mean anything, but I already knew that was a lie. 2 weeks in, I had 14 receipts with hearts on them, lined up in my nightstand drawer like a timeline of mornings I couldn't explain. I'd started counting them, and I'd started arranging them in order, and I hadn't told a single person about any of it because I didn't know how to say it out loud without sounding like a man who'd lost his grip. I began adjusting my routine in small, quiet ways that I pretended weren't adjustments at all. I started arriving 5 minutes earlier, which meant Evelyn was the one who took my order instead of the older waitress who worked the very first shift and left by the time I usually showed up. I told myself the timing was a coincidence, that I was just waking up earlier because the days were getting longer. I started noticing things about her that I had no business noticing. She remembered my order without writing it down, which the other waitresses never bothered to do. She placed my cup the same way every morning, handle turned toward my right, like she'd memorized which side I drank from. She refilled my cup before I had to ask, appearing at the table with the pot like she had a clock in her head that matched mine. I figured she was just good at her job. Some people are built for that kind of work the way some people are built for wood or for numbers or for fixing things with their hands. Evelyn was built for she could carry 4 plates on one arm and hold a conversation with a customer at the same time, and she never got an order wrong. But I started watching her with the other customers, and something didn't add up. She was warm with everyone, efficient with everyone, quick with a smile and a refill for everyone, but I didn't see her writing on anyone else's receipt. I couldn't be completely sure from table 6, and I wasn't about to get up and inspect the slips on other tables like a man conducting an investigation. But I watched, and I didn't see it. One morning, Phil, the retired mail carrier, leaned over from the counter as I was paying and said, "She's sweet on you, table 6. He said it with a grin, the kind of grin a man gets when he thinks he's figured something out. I brushed it off and told him she was just being friendly. Phil laughed and shook his head. "I've been eating here 12 years, he said. "Nobody ever drew me a heart. I thought about that all the way home. Maybe she felt sorry for me. Maybe she could tell I was a widower, the way people sometimes can, from the way you sit alone or the way your eyes go distant when the table across from you is empty. Maybe the hearts were a kindness, the kind you show to someone you think needs it, like leaving a casserole on a porch or sending a card you don't sign. That idea stung more than it comforted. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be the sad man at table 6 who needed a heart on his receipt to get through the morning. But even as I told myself that, I knew I was being dishonest, because the truth was that those hearts had become the only thing in my day that felt like it was meant for me. Then one evening, I was reaching for a jacket I hadn't worn since winter, and my hand found something in the inside pocket, a small piece of paper folded twice. I pulled it out and unfolded it, and my chest caved in. It was a note from Margaret in her handwriting, the loopy cursive she always used, even though nobody wrote in cursive anymore. "Don't forget to eat lunch, you stubborn man. I love you." She must have tucked it in there months before she died, and I'd never found it because I'd never worn that jacket in the cold. I sat on the workshop floor with that note in my hand, and I didn't get up for a long time, because the hearts on the receipts felt like the same language. Small and folded and easy to miss, left for someone who might not find them right away. And that terrified me, more than anything else that had happened. In 2 years of being alone, I considered asking Evelyn about it. I played out the conversation in my head, a simple question, casual, nothing heavy. But every version I practiced sounded wrong, too light, too probing, too much like a man who cared about the answer. And caring about the answer meant I had something at stake, and having something at stake meant I could lose it, and I'd already lost enough. A month in, I had 31 hearts in my drawer. I'd stopped pretending. I'd stopped telling myself the timing of my arrivals was a coincidence. And I'd stopped being honest with myself about why I kept the receipts, because honesty would have required me to say a word I wasn't ready to say. I played out scenarios in my head where I asked her about the hearts, casual versions, like mentioning it while she poured my coffee, direct versions like holding up the receipt and pointing at the heart. Each one sounded worse than the last. Either I'd sound like I was making a joke out of something that didn't feel like a joke, or I'd sound like a man who'd been lying awake thinking about a drawing on a piece of paper, which is exactly what I was. One morning I came close. She set the receipt down, and I opened my mouth, and the words were right there, sitting on my tongue like a stone. But she'd already turned to the next table, and the moment slid past me, and I felt two things at once. Relief, because I didn't have to find out, and disappointment, because I didn't get to find out. I started paying attention to her the way I pay attention to wood grain, looking for the pattern underneath the surface. She had a small tattoo on the inside of her left wrist, fine black lines that spelled out a date, but I couldn't read it from table 6 no matter how hard I tried without staring. She didn't wear a ring. Some mornings, she moved through the diner like she was running on something deeper than coffee, the kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't go away after a night's sleep. I noticed something else too. Her smile reached her eyes when she talked to the older customers, the ones who called her sweetheart and left quarters on the counter. But when she thought nobody was looking, between orders while she stood at the coffee station waiting for a pot to fill, her face went flat. Not sad exactly, just empty, the way a screen looks when the movie is over and the projector is still running. I recognized that look. I wore it for months after Margaret died. The face you put on when you're functioning but not living. When your body is doing the work and your mind is somewhere it can't get back from. Seeing it on Evelyn changed something in me that I didn't expect. I stopped wondering whether the hearts were about me and started wondering about her, about what she was carrying, about why she bothered drawing hearts for a stranger who never said more than thank you and I'll take the check. What made a woman in her late 20s look that tired on a Tuesday morning in a diner in a town like Millfield one evening? I pulled out the drawer of receipts and spread them across the kitchen table. 31 hearts in a row, each one drawn in the same blue pen, each one slightly different from the last. Some were careful, the lines smooth and even. Some were rushed, the curves jagged, like she'd drawn them while walking. One morning, the pen must have been running low because the heart was faint, barely visible against the white paper, like a whisper you almost didn't hear. I picked up that one and held it under the light. She could have skipped that day. The pen was dying, the line was barely there, and nobody would have noticed if she just dropped the receipt and moved on. But she drew it anyway. She pressed harder with a pen that was running out on a receipt for a man who barely spoke, and she made a heart that was almost invisible. And that was the one that broke something open in me. It wasn't the beauty of it that got to me, it was the stubbornness. She pressed harder with a pen that was running out on a receipt for a man who barely spoke, and she made a heart that was almost invisible. And that told me something about showing up that I couldn't shake. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and the rain was coming down hard enough that I almost didn't go to the diner. I stood in the doorway of my house with my keys in my hand, watching the water sheet off the porch roof, and I thought about the silence inside. The silence won, or rather the thought of the silence lost. And I drove to Mays with the wipers slapping a rhythm I couldn't match. When I walked in, Evelyn was behind the counter alone. The other morning, Waitress had called in sick, and May was in the kitchen cooking, which meant Evelyn had the entire floor to herself. She was moving fast, keeping up, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held them high and tight like she was bracing for something. The diner was busier than a rainy Tuesday had any right to be. A group of construction workers came in wet and loud, taking up 3 booths and ordering enough food to feed a worksite. Evelyn handled them the way she handled everything, with efficiency and a smile that didn't waver. But one of them, a big guy with a red hat, snapped his fingers at her when his coffee was slow to arrive. He said something about the service being sluggish, loud enough for half the diner to hear. I watched her face when he snapped. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She just nodded and said, "Coming right up," and kept moving. But when she poured coffee at the next table, I saw her hand shake, just slightly, just for a second, the pot trembling against the rim of the cup before she steadied it. When she brought my order, she set the plate down, and then she paused. She was standing at table 6, and for a moment she just stood there, not moving toward the next table, not checking on the construction workers, just standing in the rain light from the window with her weight on one hip. Then she said, "I'm glad you came in today." Her voice was quieter than usual. Stripped of the brightness, she kept on like a uniform. She didn't wait for me to respond. She was already walking away, picking up a coffee pot, putting on the smile again. But I sat there with those 6 words resting on my chest like a hand. "I'm glad you came in today," not "good morning" or the usual or "how's the weather." Something personal. Something that told me she noticed when I wasn't there, that my absence left a gap in her morning she could feel. I ate my eggs and drank my coffee, and carried those words through every bite. When she dropped the receipt, I picked it up, and the heart was there. But this time there was something else underneath it. One word, written in the same blue pen, small and careful. "Thanks." Just that one word, 5 letters, and a heart on a slip of paper from a diner in the rain. I left a bigger tip than I usually do, folded the receipt into my shirt pocket instead of my jacket, and walked out without waiting for her to come back. In the truck, I sat in the parking lot with the engine running and the rain drumming on the roof, and I read that word over and over, turning it around in my head because I couldn't figure out what she was thanking me for. I hadn't done anything. I sat at the same table and ordered the same food and said thank you when she brought my coffee, and that was all I'd ever given her. But maybe that was the whole point, that showing up was the thing, that being the one person in the diner who didn't snap his fingers and complain about the service was enough to make someone feel like the morning wasn't completely impossible. Maybe thanks wasn't about what I'd done, but about what I hadn't done. The absence of cruelty in a world that had been cruel to her that morning. I drove home slower than usual, and when I walked into the house, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I cleaned off the other side of the bed. After that Tuesday, things started shifting in ways I couldn't control and didn't entirely want to. I began cleaning the house, not all at once like a man on a mission, but piece by piece, one drawer or one shelf at a time. I gathered Margaret's things from every surface where they'd been sitting untouched. The reading glasses on the kitchen counter, the sweater draped over the chair, the half-used bottle of hand cream on the bathroom shelf. I put them in a box, not to throw away, never to throw away, but to move them from every room into one place where I could visit them, instead of living inside them. The house started to feel different after that. Not empty in the same way, but more like a house that was waiting for something instead of a house that was holding its breath. And I couldn't decide if that scared me or gave me hope, because the two had started to feel like the same thing. I began arriving at the diner a little earlier, and I brought a book with me. It was a novel Margaret had left on the nightstand, one she'd been reading before she died. The bookmarks still stuck between pages I'd never opened. I read a few pages every morning while I waited for my coffee, and it gave me a reason to be there that wasn't just about Evelyn, or at least a reason I could tell myself wasn't just about Evelyn. But I still hadn't asked about the hearts. Every morning I sat down and told myself that today would be the day, and every morning I found a reason to wait. The diner was too busy. She looked too tired. I needed one more receipt, one more heart, one more piece of evidence before I could be sure the question was worth asking. The excuses were thin, and I knew it, but they were all I had between me and a conversation I wasn't sure I could survive. I was afraid of both answers. If she said the hearts were nothing, a habit, something she did for everyone, and I'd just been too self-absorbed to notice, then the drawer full of receipts became just paper. The collection I'd been building in my nightstand would mean nothing, and I'd have to face the fact that I'd spent a month reading meaning into a waitress's pinstroke. If she said the hearts were something, then I had to decide what to do with that. And I didn't know if I was ready to do anything, because doing something meant risking something, and I'd already watched what loss looks like when it walks through your front door and doesn't knock. My neighbor Gus caught me carrying a bag of mulch from the truck to the garden one afternoon. He's older than me, maybe 70, and he's been widowed twice, which is a grief I can't imagine and don't want to. He leaned on the fence and watched me work for a minute before he said, "You look different lately, William." I asked him what he meant because I didn't think I looked different at all. I was wearing the same work shirt, the same boots, the same sawdust in my hair. But Gus shook his head and said, "You look like a man who's thinking about something besides wood." I didn't confirm or deny it because confirming it would have made it real and denying it would have been a lie. But Gus didn't need me to say anything. He just nodded, the way men nod when they recognize something in another man that they felt themselves. Then he said something that lodged in my chest and stayed there. "The second time around isn't about replacing what you lost," he said. "It's about proving you're still brave enough to try." That night, I sat in my workshop with a piece of sandpaper in my hands, not sanding anything, just holding it and feeling the grit against my fingers. I thought about what Gus said. I thought about the word thanks on the receipt. I thought about Evelyn's hand shaking when the construction worker snapped at her and the flat look on her face at the coffee station when she thought nobody was watching. And I realized something I hadn't expected, which was that I wasn't just curious about the hearts anymore. I cared about her, not in the way I'd cared about Margaret, not that kind of fire, not yet, but in the way you care about someone, whose pain you recognize from the inside, the way you look at someone and see your own loneliness staring back at you. She was carrying something the same way I was carrying something, and the hearts on the receipts were her way of reaching across the space between two people who didn't know how to talk about what they were holding. That was what pushed me past the fear. The recognition that she might be hurting mattered more than curiosity or hope or any thought of something romantic. And if she was hurting, I wanted to know. I wanted to know for her sake, not for mine. And that was the difference, the thing that separated this from everything I'd been afraid of, because for the first time in 2 years, I was thinking about someone else's pain instead of my own. It was a Thursday morning when I finally decided I was done waiting. I parked the truck in the same spot I always parked it, walked through the door of May's Diner, and sat down at table 6 by the window. I didn't bring the book, and I didn't look at my phone. I just sat there with my hands flat on the table, waiting for her to come. Evelyn brought my coffee. She set it down with the handle facing my right hand, the way she always did, and she smiled and started to turn toward the next table. I said her name, Evelyn. Just her name. Nothing else. Nothing attached to it. Just the sound of it in the morning din of a diner that smelled like bacon and burnt coffee. She stopped and turned back around and looked at me. And I could see the question in her eyes. Not concern, not worry, just a quiet attention, like she'd been waiting for me to say her name for a while. I held up the receipt from Tuesday, the one with the heart and the word thanks underneath it. I said, "I've been meaning to ask you something." My voice was steadier than I expected it to be, and I was grateful for that because my hands were not steady at all. She looked at the receipt in my hand, then at me, and her expression changed into something I didn't expect. Not fear or discomfort or the polite mask people put on when they're cornered, but something that looked more like recognition, the face someone makes when the thing they've been waiting for finally arrives and they realize they were ready for it. "All along, the hearts," I said. "Do you draw them for everyone, or is it just me?" She didn't answer right away. She glanced over her shoulder at the diner, scanning the tables to make sure nobody was waving her down. The construction workers weren't there that morning. The place was quiet. Then she did something I'd never seen her do in 3 months of sitting at table 6. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She said, "Just you." Her voice was steady but soft, the same voice she'd used when she told me she was glad I came in. She said, "I started the second week you came in. You were the only person in this diner who said thank you every single time, whether I was bringing your food, or pouring your coffee, or picking up your plate, or setting down the check. Every time you looked at me and said thank you like you meant it." She paused and looked down at her hands. The same hands I'd watched shake when the construction worker snapped at her, and she turned them over once, like she was checking to see if they still belonged to her. "My dad used to do that," she said. "He said thank you to everyone, the kid at the gas station, the clerk at the grocery store, the waitress at the diner we went to every Sunday morning when I was growing up. He said it the same way, every time, like he saw the person behind the counter and wanted them to know he saw them. And I watched people light up when he did it. My whole life, I watched people light up. I didn't say anything. I just sat there and listened, because some stories don't need a response, they need a witness." She said he died 8 months ago from a heart attack. He was 61. And then she said the thing that cracked the whole story open, the thing I'd been circling for 3 months without knowing it. "You remind me of him, not how you look, but how you are, quiet and kind and steady." And I started drawing the hearts because I didn't know how to say any of that out loud. I sat with that for a long moment. The diner hummed around us, dishes clattering, the coffee machine hissing, May calling an order through the window. None of it touched the silence at table 6. Then I told her about Margaret. Not everything, not the whole story, from the gardenias to the mud on my knees, but enough. I said, "My wife died 2 years ago. She used to leave me little notes on the fridge, on my workbench, tucked into my jacket pocket." I said the hearts on the receipts reminded me of her, and that scared me because I didn't think I could feel that again and survive it. Evelyn's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded slow and certain, the way someone nods when they understand exactly what you mean, because they've been standing in the same place themselves. She said, "I know what that kind of missing feels like. I eat dinner at my dad's old spot at the counter every Sunday. Same booth, same order, same time. I pretend he's sitting across from me and I tell him about my week, and sometimes I laugh at something he would have said, and the waitress looks at me like I'm losing it." We sat together for another minute, maybe 2, while the morning moved around us. Then she stood up, squeezed my shoulder once, quick and gentle, the way you touch someone when words aren't enough, but you need them to know you're there. And she went back to work. After that morning, things changed the way seasons change slowly. And then all at once I started staying longer at the diner, ordering a second coffee, lingering over the dregs while the morning crowd thinned out. She started sitting with me on her breaks, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, stealing moments between tables. We talked about small things at first, her nursing school classes, the one she was taking at the community college an hour south, my furniture, the dining table I was building for a woman in town who wanted something that would outlast her. The way rain sounds different in October than it does in April, heavier and closer, like the sky is sitting on the roof. Then we talked about bigger things. Her dad, the way he laughed, the way he called everyone chief, no matter who they were, Margaret, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she left notes in places I wouldn't find for months. The weight of being alone in a house that used to hold two people and now held one, and the echoes of every conversation that would never happen again. For her birthday, I built her a small wooden box out of cherry, sanded smooth, with a brass clasp. I brought it to the diner and set it on the table between us. She opened it and went quiet. Inside, I'd placed every receipt she'd ever drawn a heart on, 31 of them, pressed flat, arranged in order from the first to the last. Each one a morning, I'd sat at table 6 and let someone see me. She looked at the box, then at me, and she said, "You kept them." I said, "I kept all of them." Weeks later, on a Saturday that smelled like fall and wood smoke, I asked her to dinner somewhere that wasn't May's, somewhere with tablecloths and no counter and no name tags. She said yes, without hesitating, the same way she said, "Just you," when I asked her about the hearts, like the answer had been ready long before the question. The first time I held her hand in the parking lot of a restaurant that wasn't May's diner, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in 2 years. It was the feeling of something old and something new colliding in the same space. Margaret's memory and Evelyn's fingers, the grief and the gratitude, the fear and the hope, all of it pressed together. I didn't let go. I still go to May's every morning, same table, same order, same seat by the window. But now there's someone sitting across from me. The hearts still show up on the receipt every now and then. I don't ask why anymore. I already know. If you've ever been found by someone when you didn't know you were lost, I'd love to hear your story. Tell me about it.